Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. While the effects of the Great Recession and its aftermath have been tough on most Americans, they have been absolutely brutal for blacks in the millennial generation, men and women from 18 to 34 years of age. As spring gave way to summer, the unemployment rate for that group was a devastating 16.6%, more than twice the jobless rate for whites of the same age. According to a new report, African American millennials have to reach 2 education levels higher than their white counterparts just to have the same probability of employment. We'll discuss these and other challenges facing millennials with my guests, Tom Allison and Jasmine Hicks, 2 leaders of the Young Invincibles, a nonpartisan national group that seeks to expand opportunities for our youngest adults. Jasmine, Tom, how are you? Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Bob.
Jasmine, I'll start with you. First, tell us about the Young Invincibles. Who are you guys and what do you do?
Absolutely. So we were started back in '09. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization that seeks to amplify the voices of young adults 18 through 34. And primarily we raise their voices around higher education, student loan debt, and healthcare reform. So we educate them and also do a lot of advocacy and on-the-ground work with them.
And you've been growing, I hear, by leaps and bounds over the past few years. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's like great news. Tom, you were one of the authors of the report that I just mentioned. It's called Closing the Race Gap, Alleviating Young African American Employment Through Education. You paint a pretty dismal picture of what's going on out there. So how dire is this situation facing young black Americans?
Well, it's pretty bad, Bob. You know, once a month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out a report on the previous month's jobs numbers. And at Young Invincibles, we crunch the numbers for, by race and gender and ethnicity. And what we consistently find is that young African Americans suffer from unemployment rates that are twice the rate of their white peers. So we wanted to find out what's driving that because this has really been a consistent problem for quite some time. So what we did was we isolated the effects that race and education have on your predicted probability of having a job. And like you said, you're absolutely right. We found that you need 2 extra levels of education to have the same chance of having a job as a white person. So as an example of that, imagine you're a young African American male. You need to earn an associate's degree to have the same chance of having a job as your white peer with only a high school diploma. And that associate's degree costs over $20,000. It takes 2 years of your time just to reach that same chance. So that really proves the old adage that African Americans really have to work twice as hard in this country to compete.
So there are a couple of other examples of sort of the problems or the challenges that blacks face, especially black males apparently have a really hard time. But I saw in the report, and this is a reference to reports that came out before yours about job application studies where individuals who have African American sounding names have a much harder time getting employed or even getting a hearing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So we look at, there is this sort of multi-century legacy effect of racial discrimination in this country, things that have been happening for a long time. And we like to point, here on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act, we like to talk about the progress that we've made. But that study, looking at 2 identical sets of resumes, really demonstrates the modern day bigotry in this country. So imagine 2 resumes, both absolutely identical, but with different sounding names, one white sounding name and another black sounding name. Researchers sent those out to job postings around the country and found that just by the name alone, the white sounding name resume received 50% more callbacks for an interview. So that's something that really can't be explained other than sort of modern day and current racial bigotry.
Right. So Jasmine, you actually go around the country talking to young people about their experiences. When you talk to African American millennials about the employment situation, what are you hearing? What do they tell you?
So I'm hearing exactly what the report's reflecting. African Americans, they're going to school, but they're also very conscious of the fact that they'll still need more education. In fact, we were in North Carolina, and a student, he was about to graduate, and he was like, well, I have to go to law school, or otherwise, like, I won't have adequate job possibilities. But we've heard that around the country, over and over, whether it was in North Carolina, Ohio, Texas, but African American students feel that way, and they're taking on a lot of the debt to do this. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. They're getting further in their education, which closes the gap, and that's what the report shows, but they're also shouldering a lot of debt, which has further financial costs.
Do you see folks feeling dispirited or discouraged or angry or resentful, or is the attitude sort of just a shrug and that's the way things are?
Well, the good thing about millennials in general that we found is that we're adaptable and we're flexible. Like, we weren't expecting the recession, but it hit us, and we've been able to adapt. And I think the same is with young African Americans, myself included.
Right. Tom, on this unemployment situation, obviously it's a tough economy for everyone. And I've been following the reports of you guys, and it seems like there's an awful lot of young people who have either left the job market entirely or have never really entered the job market. Now, they're of working age. What are they doing?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, really, that's what we refer to as disconnected youth.
Right.
The folks that aren't in school and aren't in the job market. And that should really scare everyone in the country. It's not just what they're doing and they're sort of, staying idle and not contributing to the economy, because we actually did a report last year that showed that the annual cost of youth unemployment is about $25 billion. So all those folks that aren't working, not only are they not paying taxes that they would be if they were working, they're receiving some social safety net benefits, though the share is much larger on the taxes. So I think that there's that side on the macroeconomic level. But you really have to put yourself in their shoes. If you think about how important your first job was, it doesn't matter if it was mopping floors, washing dishes, which was my first job. That gives you a certain amount of confidence, a certain amount of demeanor. It's really kind of a character building exercise. So if you don't have that first job, that just means that your next rung is going to be a little bit lower as you climb up that ladder. And so it's really going to have some scarring effects moving forward.
I was just going to ask you about the scarring effects. The experts talk about that quite a bit. If you're out of work for a long time, or if you have trouble getting into the job market in the first place, the effects last for a long time, sometimes for a lifetime. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So if you're unemployed for about 6 months, you can expect $25,000 lower of your median income after you are employed later down the line. So you're not getting the experience, you're not getting other opportunities. It's something that we all need to come together as a country to look at early on and not just brush this problem under the rug of like, oh, these folks don't have jobs yet. So it's really something we need to tackle head on.
Jasmine, it would appear to me that if you're loaded down with college debt, assuming you've gone to college, if you're having trouble in the job market, you're either unemployed or you're not making a great deal of money, it makes it very difficult to get a foothold on an adult standard of living. I mean, if folks want to get married, or if they want to raise a family, or if they want to make the down payment on that first home. Mm-hmm. Do you see millennials delaying those sort of aspects of adulthood?
Absolutely. Young adults, they're having roommates later in life. They're going back to live with their parents. They're pushing off home ownership. They're getting married later. We're having children later, all because of a lot of the financial debt and burdens that we carry. So it's absolutely affecting us all.
Tom, have you seen any studies, or do you have any insights into what sort of this delayed step into full-fledged adulthood, the kind of impact that might have long term?
Well, there's some things that are cultural and societal, such as the delaying of marriage, that may have less of an economic impact. But one thing I would point to is the fact that the effect on entrepreneurialism. So most economists say that when they study startup businesses, it takes about 3 years for a business to become profitable. So that's 3 years where you have to sort of sacrifice, pay for, sort of pay your own way, et cetera, as you build your business. That's going to be really difficult if you're paying $600 a month in student debt repayments.
Right.
It's going to be really difficult if you don't have the sort of money to clothe yourself and feed yourself and house yourself. So I think that's one thing we should really be thinking about is the effect on innovation and new businesses that this sort of nasty economy is having on our youth.
Do you think that, either one of you can jump in on this one, do you think that there is a difference in the way millennials approach the idea of relationships, marriage, and family compared to, say, the baby boomer generations, which got so much attention for so long?
Well, I know for one, baby boomers, about 46% were married between 18 and 34 in their generation. So half of them were married in that time frame. And today it's about 25%.
That's really a big difference.
Cut in half.
Yeah. Do you see that as a good thing, or maybe a not so great thing?
Well, for one, I guess my wife would probably say that it's good for me anyway.
Right.
My personal situation, but honestly, it's something that I don't think necessarily has a big impact culturally. I
mean, I would assume that there would be some advantage to delaying marriage beyond, say, the early 20s. Folks used to get married in many cases in their late teens, as long as you didn't have sort of the economic disadvantages that so many young people are having nowadays.
I've heard even that it limits your dating choices.
Is that right?
Yeah, you don't want to date someone else with $150,000 worth of debt, and you also have that. So.
That's really interesting. So so for decades, people have talked about marriage as a way of fending off poverty, of achieving a higher standard of living, because you can bring two incomes, you can work together, you can make that down payment on the first home. But now you have to consider how much debt each side is bringing to the table. So you're actually encountering that?
Yeah, I've heard that from students, just having casual conversations. It's like, oh, I only have $25,000. I'm not going to date someone with $75,000 and who's a teacher. So it's factoring in social decisions as well.
Oh my goodness. Let's talk about millennials who are employed, and this is, millennials across the board. What kind of jobs, and let's talk about the ones coming out with a 4-year degree, let's say. What kind of jobs are they getting? Are they actually getting jobs, for the most part, that require a college education?
Well, a lot of that depends. So if you're coming out of college right now with, let's just say, a petroleum geology degree, you're going to be doing pretty well in the workforce. And there are 4 million job openings in this country right now, most of which require some sort of high technical skill that we're capable of investing in and bringing in front of our young people. But there are a lot of degrees that aren't producing that sort of return on investment. And that's something that I think we're starting to see in a lot of the national debates in higher education, is the return on investment, the value of individual degrees, because it is sort of a black box. You're told to go get a bachelor's degree, or we're told to go and pursue education, and on the average, that's a good positive return on your investment. It's going to be worth your time and money. But there are a lot of degrees where that's just not going to happen. So in terms of like the jobs that are available, we know that computer science, engineering, healthcare and education are large growing sectors that I would definitely encourage any young person listening to study, as well as computer programming and coding. That's something that we have to import a lot of workers for. We're unable to fill those jobs.
And what about this idea of following the route that you love, or dancing to the beat of a different drum? I mean, are kids going to school primarily to get a good job when they come out, or to pursue a high-paying career? Or are they still looking at this idea of sort of a wiser, well-rounded individual? I imagine there's trade-offs there too, but what are you seeing among millennials?
I think we've seen that was the case maybe pre-recession, but post-recession, I think people are looking more at jobs, and a lot of the work that we're doing is to get that information to students. We've had like tools that work kits that show on our website that show the salaries that you could be making in your potential field. So I think it's really an education point, and going back to the report, that's one of our solutions, really educating high school students on their majors, on the financial portion of attending college.
Do you have a personal feeling about whether that's a good thing or not, to be sort of pinpointing the salary you could be making if you follow this major as opposed to the salary you might be making if you did the thing you really loved?
Well, if you're taking out $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in debt to pursue that, I think you need to have that conversation with yourself and sort of do the calculations there. So there's a lot we can do to sort of make that more transparent. But I think for the most part, we hear from young people that they really see education as an investment in themselves, an investment in their future job prospects. Unlike our report shows, with each additional level of education, young African Americans have a better chance of having a job, and that gap closes, and it closes between whites and blacks with each additional level of education. I was going to say, just that said, we also do hear a little bit about the absolute benefits of education. There's a lot of pride that's involved a lot of times, particularly for first-generation students. Right. So there is, sort of this sort of creative approach to problem solving, that sort of things that you can't necessarily measure as easily as your salary.
Let's talk about youngsters who don't have a college degree. They either maybe went to high school, got a high school diploma, or sadly dropped out of even high school. What kind of jobs are they having? Are they getting, and what kinds of unemployment rates are they facing?
They're certainly facing the highest unemployment rates of anyone else. There's without a doubt, high school dropouts have the toughest chance of having a job.
And if they are working, what kind of jobs do they have? Dropouts or high school graduates?
Talking about part-time, low wage, no benefits jobs that really don't pay a living wage and aren't really a path to prosperity for them.
Jasmine, do you talk to many young people, young men and women who are in that situation?
We've tried. So even talking to those individuals, we've called them disconnected adults. It's really hard to reach them. When you're organizing around higher education, you can go to college campuses, but it's really hard to get groups of young people who may not be students but who are just working, because they're always working. So it's really hard to get that group of people together, but we've been working on efforts to do that better.
And this is a pretty large population, because I think it's only roughly a third of Americans in general who actually get a four-year degree. Isn't that correct?
That's about right. I think it's actually a little bit lower than that if you think about the entire population.
Right.
So we're at a point where the percentages aren't high, but we know that by 2025, 60% of all jobs are going to require some sort of post-secondary degree. Now that doesn't have to be a bachelor's degree. That could be an associate's degree or a post-secondary certificate, vocational degree. But we know that in order to stay competitive internationally and efficient as an economy, we're going to need to increase the amount of degrees that we have, particularly among the students of color, considering the size of that population.
Right. So your report focused on African American young people, millennials. For one thing, it saw education as maybe the best path to close some of the gaps between the races. But it also found sort of significant disparities in education as well as disparities in employment. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So we know that African Americans' first experience with the higher education system tends to be at the two-year degree level, so at their local community college, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons why we need to figure out ways to better help that pipeline. There are a lot of folks that get the two-year degree, that get these good credits, but their state's flagship university won't accept those credits for transfer. So there are things we can do to improve that, because there are disparities in sort of where your first contact with the system is.
Right. And also, with the cost of college education now, it's almost like that's a boulder in the road blocking progress, and it's more so for African Americans, kids of color, who very often come from poorer families, more economically disadvantaged backgrounds. What are some of the steps that can be taken to sort of overcome that economic disadvantage if you want to get a really good education?
Well, I think one is bolstering Pell Grants. A lot of African American students use Pell Grants to cover their tuition. So making sure that we're investing in Pell Grants, especially as tuition costs rise. So that's one thing. Reforming the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the federal application for aid, and making sure students of color are filling that out, first of all, and then making sure it's easy enough for them to understand, especially if they're a first-generational college student. And then I'd say adding guidance counselors as far as high school and getting them, when they're selecting colleges, and getting them the right information that they need to make that selection as far as affordability, cost, and all the other factors that contribute to it.
You mentioned guidance counselors, and I think that's interesting because I noticed in the report that high-achieving African-American students in high school don't apply to the most selective colleges in anything close to the same rate as high-achieving white students. So I would assume that guidance counselors and advice are a couple of the factors involved in that, but why do you think there's that disparity? If a kid's like really a great student in high school, why is that kid not applying to more selective colleges?
I think that's a really good point, Bob. It comes down to the fact that it's another echo effect, really. It's another legacy. Imagine if your parents, both your parents, went to college, say at an elite university. They know how, you have an in-house counselor right there. You don't need to use the high school counselor
Right,
in your high school. They know when the deadlines are. They know how to navigate the system. They know how to prep for an interview. If your parents didn't have that advantage, then you all of a sudden are dealing with a high school counselor system with the ratio at 500 students to one counselor. And a lot of times it's a lot worse than that in low income and minority heavy schools. So I think that's just another compounding effect. If you don't have your parents to help you and to counsel you through that from their own experiences, you're going to be at a disadvantage.
Now, we heard an awful lot, especially after the election of Barack Obama as president, that we were in this post-racial era in the United States now. The things we've been talking about on this program and the stuff in your report suggests that, you know, there may still be a question about that. Do you guys think that we're in a post-racial era?
The easy answer is no. And again, the report reflects that, but there are solutions to helping these issues. So education, again, being one of them, but you know, just because of past experiences, it shows that we're not completely in a post-racial America.
Right. Tom, if you could wave a magic wand and you could sort of do anything to take care of some of these issues, the employment disparities, the educational disparities, what are a couple of the things that you think would be most important?
Well, number one priority for me would be to convince state legislatures and governors around the country to reinvest in their public higher ed systems. There's only so much the federal government can do here, considering that 3/4 of all students, all college students, attend public colleges. So it's really important for state legislators and governors to realize that, hey, we've cut our higher ed budgets by 25% since the recession. We cut the budget at every single recession, and we never recover back to where we need to be. And that's one of the driving forces of rising tuition. It's the driving force between this higher student debt crisis. So if I could convince anything, it would be the importance of an affordable, quality, public higher education system in all the states.
Jasmine, last word. What's one quick thing you'd like to see happen?
I'd like to also see that happen, but I'd like to see more students get involved, and we're doing a student impact project where students can get involved and learn their state budgets and learn how to advocate for themselves on college affordability. So I want students to get more involved, and I want them to be able to access this information, and that's one thing we're working on, and they can visit our website to do that as well, our student impact project website.
So we've run out of time. You guys were great. I hope to have you back again. Thanks so much for being with us. And we'll be back in a moment with a final word. The United States is undergoing an historic change. The population is rapidly dividing between an older segment, which is mostly white, and a significantly younger group, which is increasingly minority. More white Americans died last year than were born, and baby boomers are hastening into retirement. America in 2030 and 2040 will look radically different from the so-called greatest generation of the post-World War II era. We have not spent nearly enough time giving serious thought to the profound implications of this shift. Young people will be asked to shoulder a great deal of the retirement and health care costs of a generation that it is not intimately familiar with. And there is a pressing need to prepare this younger, more diverse, and to some extent economically disadvantaged population for the demands of national and international leadership that will be thrust upon it before we know it. We have an obligation as individuals and as a nation to face this challenge head on. That's all for now. See you next time.